And this East-West relationship is breaking down, according to Zoltan. And he thinks that, when we talk about the inflation, you had all of this money created and unproductivity created at the same time, where everyone was locked down and paid money to be locked down. So it created more money chasing fewer goods. That's price inflation off of the exchanges.
My gravest concern in this is the ordinary families, the ordinary Jane and Joes up and down the blocks of America. If 99.5% of people, according to Rick Rule, have no participation, no physical precious metal ownership, no participation in natural resource mining or precious metals, mining stocks and shares, that sort of thing, that inability by the time that they do awaken to the necessity of owning something tangible, of lasting and enduring value, when there's nothing else to be had, when the stock market is collapsing and the real estate market and the bond market and there's nowhere else, and then they come to realize, as many people are these days, that the purchasing power of their dollars are being just drained out through inflation and overprinting, that there's nowhere else to run to, and the massive potential for real human suffering and real destruction of people's lives and livelihoods and their families' futures is on a scale that I'm not sure we've ever seen before in the modern era, and that's my greatest concern. That was the roots of our channel, Reluctant Preppers, with helping people to be aware and prepared to take care of their families on different eventualities that might come, natural disasters or any kind of thing. And it emerged. This kept emerging, pushing itself to the front of everybody's concern. Who was tuned into that channel, which is a very small fraction of even the 0.5%, and that's this coming financial stress. And many of the analysts we've had on have talked about this will make the so-called Great Depression of the 1930s look like a cakewalk if this grinds on potentially for a decade or more, perhaps 2 decades, like the Japan recession has been, and losing, perhaps 80% or more value from the stock markets, and who knows how much. Alistair McLeod keeps talking to us about the complete collapse of fiat currencies, just the end of the dollar and the euro, the yen, et cetera, just going away and having to be completely replaced.
Well, that's what I've been saying for the last 2 years also, in that I think the BRICS nations are going to challenge the dollar for world reserve. They just came out and publicly said that 2 weeks ago. They're going to issue a new world reserve currency. When you add all of these countries into that equation, it's 90% of human population. I think it's going to happen. But let's talk about it. Let's just take that out of the equation for a minute. One of my favorite analysts is Zoltan Pozsar. He's the former New York Fed repo market expert. He's been very right on a lot of his calls. And he's talking about an East-West dichotomy, similar to what I've been talking about, similar to what Alistair is talking about, where the West was the demand and the East was the supply. And this East-West relationship is breaking down, according to Zoltan. And he thinks that, when we talk about the inflation, you had all of this money created and unproductivity created at the same time, where everyone was locked down and paid money to be locked down. So it created more money chasing fewer goods. That's price inflation. And he's talking about the fact that, basically what needs to be done. And he came out and said, I couldn't believe he said it. He said that the Fed will have to raise rates to 5 or 6% and keep them there for years in order to curb inflation. And to your point, even at the cost of an economic depression. And basically what he's saying is that as the supply is cut off from the East, that you end up with a situation where you have the only way to curb inflation is to keep rates high enough to bring demand down, to bring price inflation down. And he's openly saying that the only way to do this is to raise rates high enough for an extended period of time. Like you said, in Japan, when I started in this industry in 1990, the Nikkei was 40,000, and they owned Rockefeller Center and Pebble Beach Golf Course and casinos in Vegas and ski resorts in Colorado, and anything with an engine or a motherboard they made better. And here we are today, after 30 years of their interest rates being at or near zero. They're not even 2/3 or roughly 3/4 of the way back to there. I think they're at 28,000 or something like that today, somewhere in that neighborhood. 40,000 being the peak. It hasn't come back in 3 decades. And that's with suppressing interest rates artificially. So what Zoltan is talking about is raising interest rates enough to put us into a depression, to curb demand, to bring price inflation down. I mean, that's coming from a guy who worked for the New York Fed. So whether it's done by the Fed intentionally, or it's done by the rest of the world, de-dollarizing, moving away from the dollar, as I surmise is a greater likelihood. Either way, it's either inflation or depression. Take your pick. That's what Fed Chairman Powell has to deal with. And, every government since Roman times has chosen inflation over the tough decisions. And I wonder, will this be anything different? This is why I have always felt that this will come organically from the East as they move away from the dollar, as they continue. Look, we talked about the other day, you have the Russians, the central bank talking about a new gold price hub in Moscow for the Eurasian continent, for all of the BRICS nations, as they put it, to break the manipulation of the Western COMEX and London Metals Exchange. They know it's coming. Heck, in 2004 or 5, there was a GATA put on a conference in the Yukon, and Putin had sent one of his economic advisors to the conference, the GATA conference. They've known about the Western manipulation forever, but the countries who have been accumulating all the gold, they don't care when the price is suppressed. They end up being able to accumulate it at subsidized prices, but that's changing. These countries are now accelerating their desire to de-dollarize. They've massively produced and accumulated gold over the last several decades. They're continuing to do so. Now they want it priced fairly, where you can't have 55 million ounces on the price setting mechanism when you mine almost 1 billion ounces a year. How can that be? How can you trade 100 or 1,000 times more silver and gold than there is on the exchange when it's not backed by anything? It's rehypothecated. This is a scam, and the world knows it, and I think we are getting to that point rapidly. So whether it be by the Fed getting tough on inflation, as Zoltan Pozar says, raising interest rates to 5 or 6%, or more appropriately, letting the market set the rates, not the Fed, when that happens, then you can really have price discovery. But that's a religious experience when it does happen. And to your point, most people, I talked to a financial advisor today, a guy who's been on Wall Street forever, and I gave him my thesis. I think I frightened him. And he kept saying, yeah, but, and I had an answer for everyone. And at the end, he said, you got me. I can't poke holes in it. But these are guys. This is a guy that's been a financial advisor, traded on Wall Street, a huge career, and doesn't own an ounce of gold and silver. The public has not an idea of what is coming, and they think that everything will be made to, soft landing and everything will be okay the way that it always has. But if we lose the petrodollar status, if we see Saudi Arabia join the BRICS nations, like it seems like they're going to, if we see them open up oil purchases and other currencies, all of this like that, it vaporizes the Fed as a sideshow. But I will simply say this, even if I'm wrong about all of that, you get a guy like Zoltan Pozar says the only way to curb this inflation is to keep interest rates for years above 5 or 6%, even at the cost of an economic depression, not just a recession, a depression. That's the only way to bring it under control. So, I find it to be very concerning. And maybe the big money is starting to realize this. The people closest to the information is starting to realize this is what you have to do.